Imagine driving down a road where the world just ends. No streetlights, no houses, just a wall of white static and the skeletal fingers of frozen pine trees reaching out from the dark. That's where I was. It's the kind of cold that doesn't just chill your skin. It feels like it's trying to freeze your very thoughts. I was on the last bus heading north, a rusted-out metal box that felt less like a vehicle and more like a target. There were only 4 of us on board, including the driver, a man whose face was so deep in the shadows of his cap that he looked like a ghost himself. We were all silent, staring out into the blizzard, waiting to get home. But something out there in the snow had other plans for us. Something that wasn't waiting for the bus to stop. It was waiting for us to notice it. It started with a sound, not the engine, and not the wind howling against the glass. It was a rhythmic, wet thud, thump, 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 like a heavy, waterlogged boot hitting the side of the bus. At first, I thought it was just ice falling from the wheel wells. You know that sound, right? That heavy slush that builds up and drops off. But this was different. It stayed consistent, even as the bus slowed down to crawl through a massive snowdrift. I looked across the aisle at the only other passenger near me, a young woman clutching her backpack. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the window. She wasn't looking at the snow. She was looking at the reflection in the glass. And that's when I saw it too. A hand. A pale, elongated hand with fingers that looked 3 inches too long, pressed firmly against the outside of the window, moving perfectly in sync with the speed of the bus. Think about that for a second. We were going 40 miles per hour. No human can run 40 miles per hour through knee-deep snow. And yet there was a hand, flat against the glass, leaving a smear of something dark and oily behind. I felt my stomach drop into my shoes. I wanted to scream, to tell the driver to floor it, but my throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. I watched, paralyzed, as a second hand appeared. Then, slowly, a head began to rise from the bottom of the window frame. It didn't have hair. It didn't have ears. It was just a smooth, wet-looking gray skull with 2 cavernous holes where eyes should have been. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking at the driver. It was as if it was studying him, waiting for the exact moment his grip on the wheel flickered. Suddenly, the bus lurched. The brakes screeched, a sound so violent it felt like it was tearing the air apart. We all flew forward as the bus slid sideways, the heavy tires losing their fight with the black ice beneath the powder. With a sickening crunch, we drifted off the shoulder and tilted into a ditch. Silence followed. A silence so heavy it felt like it was crushing my chest. The engine had died. The heater groaned one last time and flickered out. The driver didn't move. He just sat there, his hands still gripped at 10 and 2. "Don't look out the windows," he whispered. His voice was trembling, so hard it was barely a breath. "Whatever you do, don't let it see you looking." But it was too late. The woman across from me let out a sob, a small, choked-out sound. And in that instant, the thing outside tapped on the glass. Ting, ting, ting. It was the sound of a sharp fingernail hitting the pane. It wasn't a monster trying to break in. It was a predator playing with its food. It knew we were trapped. It knew the bus was now nothing more than a metal can full of meat. I looked toward the back of the bus, and my heart stopped. There wasn't just one. Shadows were detaching themselves from the trees, moving with a strange, jerky motion that defied physics. They moved like spiders, their limbs bending at impossible angles, gliding over the snow without leaving a single footprint. Now, imagine being in that bus. The temperature is dropping by the second. Your breath is coming out in thick white clouds. You're surrounded by a forest that wants you dead, and there are things outside that are literally miming your movements. Every time the woman in front of me shifted, the thing at her window shifted in the exact same way. It was mocking us. The driver finally turned around, and in the dim emergency light, I saw that his face was bone white. He told us there was a flare kit on the front seat, but to get it, someone had to reach near the door that was currently being leaned on by one of those gray, eyeless things. We sat there for what felt like hours, listening to the sound of claws scraping against the metal skin of the bus. It sounded like 1,000 needles being dragged across a chalkboard. Then the scraping stopped. It was replaced by something much worse. A voice. It sounded like my mother. "It's so cold out here," the voice said from right outside my window. "Please, let me in. It's so cold." My heart hammered against my ribs. My mother had been dead for 5 years. I knew it wasn't her. I knew it was a trap, but the voice was perfect. It had her exact inflection, her exact way of pronouncing my name. The woman across from me started to stand up, her eyes glazed over. "That's my daughter," she whispered. "My daughter is out there." I grabbed her arm, tried to pull her back, but she was like a woman possessed. She reached for the emergency lever on the window. "No." I hissed, but it was too late. She popped the seal. The sound of the rushing wind filled the bus. But it wasn't just wind. A pale, gray arm whipped inside the gap with the speed of a snake. It didn't grab her by the waist or the shoulder. It hooked its long, jagged nails into her hair and yanked. She didn't even have time to scream. 1 second she was there, and the next, she was being pulled through a gap that was barely 6 inches wide. We heard the sound of bones snapping, the wet crunch of a body being forced through a space it shouldn't fit. And then she was gone. The only thing left was her backpack and a single bloody glove on the floor. The driver and I were the only ones left now. We huddled in the center aisle, as far from the windows as possible. The things outside were screaming now, a high-pitched, warbling sound that vibrated in our teeth. They weren't just outside the windows anymore. We could hear them on the roof. Thump, thump, thump. They were walking above us, their weight making the thin metal ceiling bow inward. I looked up and saw the shape of a hand pressing down through the ceiling panels. They were trying to peel the bus open like a sardine can. "The flare," the driver whispered. "If we can just get the flare off, the heat might drive them back. They hate the light." I realized then that I was the only one close enough to reach the kit. I had to crawl past the seat where the woman had just been snatched. I had to put my hand near the window, where the glass was still smeared with her blood. I moved on my hands and knees, every muscle in my body shaking. I reached the kit and fumbled with the latch. My fingers were so cold they felt like wooden sticks. Just as I gripped the flare, the bus rocked violently. Something huge had slammed into the side. I looked up, and for the first time, I saw one of them clearly. It was pressed against the windshield. It had no skin, just layers of translucent, gray muscle. It opened its mouth, and inside were rows upon rows of needle-thin teeth, dripping with a black, viscous fluid. It wasn't just an animal. It smiled at me. It actually smiled. It knew I was terrified. It enjoyed it. I struck the flare. A brilliant, blinding red light exploded in the cabin. The creature on the windshield let out a shriek that sounded like grinding metal and vanished into the darkness. The things on the roof scrambled away, their claws clicking frantically. For a moment, we were safe. The red glow filled the bus, casting long, dancing shadows. But as the flare burned down, I realized something horrifying. The light didn't just scare them away. It showed me how many of them there were. The forest was crawling with them. Hundreds of gray, spindly figures were circling the bus just outside the reach of the red light, waiting for the glow to die. The driver looked at me, and I saw a look in his eyes that I'll never forget. It wasn't fear anymore. It was resignation. He knew the flare wouldn't last forever. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver whistle. "When this light goes out," he said, "don't run for the road. Run for the river. The water is moving too fast for them to follow." I asked him how he knew that. He just looked at the door and whispered, "Because I've been here before, and I'm the only one who came back last time." The flare flickered. The red light began to dim, turning into a deep, bloody purple. The scratching on the roof started again. Slowly, cautiously, I gripped the door handle, my heart beating so hard I thought it would burst. The driver put the whistle to his lips. The light died. The darkness rushed back in like a flood. The driver blew the whistle, a sound so piercing felt like a physical blow, and shouted, "Run!" I burst through the door and hit the snow. It was waist deep and freezing, but I didn't care. I ran. I didn't look back. I could hear the driver behind me, but his shouts were quickly replaced by a sickening, wet tearing sound. I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned like fire, until I could hear the roar of the river over the howling wind. I tumbled down the embankment and plunged into the icy water, grabbing onto a fallen log. I looked back at the road. High above me, the bus was glowing, not with light, but with the reflections of 1,000 tiny, pale eyes. The creatures weren't chasing me anymore. They were all gathered around the bus, standing perfectly still, watching me float away. And as I drifted down the river, shivering and half dead, I saw one of them standing at the very edge of the water. It didn't attack. It just raised a long, gray hand and waved. It wasn't goodbye. It was a promise. It knew that the road would always be there. And sooner or later, everyone has to go home. I was found 3 miles downstream the next morning by a snowplow driver. They never found the bus. They never found the woman or the driver. When the police went to the coordinates I gave them, all they found was an empty stretch of road and a single bloody glove sitting in the middle of the pavement. There were no tracks in the snow, no signs of a struggle, just the silence of the forest. I don't go out in the snow anymore. I don't take the bus. Because sometimes when I'm lying in bed and the wind howls outside my window, I hear it. Ting, ting, ting. A fingernail on the glass. And I know they're still waiting for me to come back to that road.